like your hat, Darren.
Thanks. My mum actually knit this hat for me.
Did you?
Yeah, it's very nice.
Yeah, it's lovely.
It's also quite nippy. It looks a bit like one of Vera Duckworth's tea cozies, but it's nice.
Oh,
Sorry,
Coronation
ma'am.
Street
I love
reference. I love it. That's our first Coronation Street reference.
Well,
excellent.
Stay tuned, there'll be more.
Yes.
All right, here we are, episode 14, and we're talking to Paddy Fitzgerald.
I guess one of the most respected, best loved musicians in the traditional Irish scene in Melbourne over the last 40 years. An incredibly influential player, along with his brother Joe. And it's just a complete delight to have a chance to talk to him.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, this conversation, so we're delighted when we finally got a chance to sit down and do it. Before we get into it, I just want to harp on about the thing that I normally do, and that's our Patreon page. Now, my good listeners, you did have a break last week. We didn't mention it at all. So this week, I'm going to go extra hard on you. First of all, I do want to thank everyone that's gone over to Patreon and actually put their hand in their pocket to support the podcast. You're a bunch of bloody legends. Thank you so much. For everyone else, I'm guessing there's a lot of you out there and you're thinking, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to do that. Can we make this week the week? That'd be amazing. If you can just go over there, patreon.com/Blarney Pilgrims.
Patreon.com/Blarney Pilgrims. That's Patreon. I keep saying that because lots of people are going like, what is that thing? It's Patreon. And that's where you can do it. Just click on the green button that says become a patron, you boy.
Right, so let's
Paddy,
get into the thick of it. We've got some technical stuff up front.
All right, so you'll hear at the beginning of this conversation, we have this, we just started chatting about the two different styles of accordion that are often played in Irish music. One being the BC accordion and the other being a C-sharp D accordion. And they're both similarly structured in that they have two rows of buttons for the right hand and then they have bass buttons for the left hand. But they have a different tone to them, I guess, and tunes can kind of sound a bit different. They have a different sort of timbre to them. And in part, I think that's because in a BC accordion, you can do different kinds of ornamentation and different flourishes than you can do in a C-sharp D accordion. Right. So that's what we're talking about with Paddy when we start. Just so for anybody who's hasn't seen a lot of Irish accordion playing, and box, by the way, we use the word box. That's what we're talking about, a button box.
I'm also just going to throw Dom under the bus just a little bit by making him commit to something. So hopefully most of you know at this stage, Dom on the Patreon site, when we do a post, there are extra links that he puts in there, and I'm hoping this week, by the sense of it, you've done some research already, so you might have some links. I can't claim
any original research. A lot of this comes from a guy called Graham Smith, who you should check this out. Actually, there's a piece by Graham Smith, and I'll link to that, and that's got loads of information, particularly about Paddy and his brother Joe and their respective styles of playing and their influence in the Melbourne scene. So that's worth checking out. That'll be in the notes. Brilliant. But for now, let's get on with the music. Also joining us in this recording was Chris Fitzgerald, the publican from The Last Jar, no relation to Paddy, but he very graciously sat in with us and played along, and you'll hear him chip in with a few choice comments here and there. So with that, away we go.
Enjoy.
Could you tell me what kind of box you have?
I've got a B&C box. It's a little French accordion, this one. Mm-hmm. It's a saltarella.
Right.
And early on in my life, I played a paolo soprani. We always thought the paolo soprani was that's the Italian one.
Aye.
That was the one to have.
Yeah.
But as life went along, bits and pieces of health went on me, and I lost some of my strength. And I went back to Ireland in a short time after that, and I found out that people were playing this little accordion, which was a French one, and it was a lot lighter than the paolo soprani. And I found I had a lot more control over it. But at the same time, I felt that I was still getting as much out of it as I was getting from the paolo soprani. So I decided to get one of those in 1996. And I've stuck with it ever since. And I've got a half a dozen different boxes. But I stick with the little French one, or the saltarella. It's a B&C tuning.
Right.
But
and the B&C means that you can basically play any key with the B&C, right? So it's
you can actually. In the old days, probably we'll say from 45, 50, 60, getting up to that stage, everybody played the ordinary C-sharp D box, which was very basic. When you grab a hold of an accordion and you try and get a note or a few lines out of it, this is what sort of comes to you, a very handy way of playing it. You know, you get a do, re, mi, fa, so out of it pretty simply. Then the woman that was here a couple of weeks ago, Eileen O'Brien was her name, her father went to America and he revolutionised the accordion completely. He brought in a new style where the B&C was the box to play. And as life went on, I found you can play both boxes. You know, in Clare now we have the C-sharp D is very popular, but the B&C is very popular too because of what Paddy O'Brien did. And all the good players now will say that Joe Burks, Finbar Dwyer, and Danny Mahoney and all those great accordion players now, they'd all play B&C. But then you have people like Andrew McNamara, who was just as good a player as any of them, and Tony McMahon, who was his uncle, and then the famous Joe Cooley. They all played the C-sharp D, which came very, very, it sort of comes automatic to you, rather than you having to it's a different style altogether. What happened really with us was we started off, of course, with the C-sharp D. The first little accordion we got was a little single row, and it was a little single row accordion, and I'm not sure what key that was in, but my mother taught us on that one, and she got us going on that one. But then, of course, the next box we laid our hands on was a C-sharp D. And that was a handy enough box to play on. But then I played on a C-sharp D until probably when I came out here in 1959. I played until about 1970. And Joe, my brother, went back to Ireland. And when he came back, he said, we've got to rethink this box. We have to change our style to a B&C because Paddy O'Brien, he was the hero at the time. Paddy O'Brien was the man, and Eileen's father, and he was playing a B&C. So all of a sudden, I was buying myself a B&C, and then it was as if I had to start from scratch again. It was all a completely different setting. You'd understand, Chris, what I'm talking about, I'm sure you'd. It was a different setting, and it was as if you had to turn the box nearly upside down. So I had to start all over again, but we battled on with it, and that's what I'm playing now at the moment.
And what was the difference what was Joe saying to you? Was it about the fact that there was a change in fashion, or was it about things that you could do with this that you couldn't do previously?
It was a sort of a change in fashion, but after changing in fashion, you still didn't leave the C-sharp D behind. Like, I still love to grab hold of the C-sharp D and play it, even today.
Does it feel different to you?
Oh, yes.
How does it feel?
Oh, it feels a lot different. It comes more automatic to you. The music comes more automatic, whereas I have to think about what I do with this. Not so much now, because I've been playing this now for the last, for 30 or 40 years, I suppose. You know, you sort of get the hang of it after that. If you're not getting the hang of it after that length of time, it's time to give it away.
Yes, it's not
You know, if you
doesn't matter how many rules you've got.
well, do something with it, sort of thing.
Do they scratch a different musical itch? So why would you pick up one rather than the other? Do they serve a different purpose each?
No, Darren, it's what you lay your hands on.
Right.
You know, it's just what you lay your hands on. But then there are certain people who wouldn't play the B and C, but would only play the C sharp D. But then you have the same thing happening the other way around as well. I was home now last year, and I had this little accordion. I had it tuned by a man by the name of Charlie Harris in Ardrahan in County Galway. And Charlie is as good an accordion player as there is in Ireland, and he plays the C sharp D. And he's the lead accordion player with the Tullykelly Band. A pure legend of a man. But he plays the C sharp D, and he plays absolutely beautiful music on it. And then when I heard him playing, I thought to myself, why am I playing a B and C? That sort of way, you know? And he said to me, actually, I was down there one day, I had a hell of a job to get him to tune this box. He was so busy, he was tuning boxes for everybody, and that was at the time that France was after winning the World Cup in soccer, and they wanted Irish music in all the pubs in Paris when the French players came back. And of course Charlie went over to France because everybody wanted him playing in their pub. But anyway, he tuned my box for me, and I think he made a great job of it anyway. But when I was there, I ran into a lot of accordion players that was dropping in and out to him. And another fellow was a fellow by the name of Charlie Piggott. He was from Cork, and he was playing a C sharp D. And they said to me, you fellas down in Clare don't play a C sharp D at all, do you? You're all being seeming down there. But I hang on, lads, we will go at anything. We do whatever. And anyway, it's not so much, you know, you can play perfect music on both of them if you're good enough. Let's put it that way. And tell me which one. The one we played first, or will we? That little tune was called Tatter Jack Welsh. The jig, a lovely jig. And it was one of the tunes, I suppose, it was one of the first tunes I learned.
What was the first box that you played?
It was a single row little melodeon, and it was one that my dad picked up from a builder, or from a house he was building, where the owner had two little accordions, and he knew that Dad had a few children and probably couldn't afford to buy an instrument for any of us, but he gave him one of them, and he brought it home one Saturday night on a bicycle. That was my dad's transport. There was no such thing as a ute or a van or anything in them times. But it got wet on the way home, and in the morning when we got up, I remember I seen it sitting in front of the fire, and I could not believe my eyes when I seen we had an accordion in the house. But he said, "Don't touch it, lads," he said, "because it's all wet." we're trying to air it out. We're trying to get the rain out of it. But anyway, I don't know, was that a good idea or not? Because nowadays you wouldn't want to have your box too near the fire. But anyway, that was the little accordion we started off on. My mum probably started us off on a little slow air or maybe a march or something like that. I remember the first tune I learned anyway was an air by the name of Eileen O'Roon.
Oh,
Very
yes.
simple little air. And if I can think of it, I might play it in a minute for you. And then maybe The Wearing of the Green might have been the second one. But my mum's brother, Stephen Mahon, who lived in Galway, actually, we were born in Galway, myself and Tom and Joe, the three eldest of us, because my dad was working down in Galway and he probably met my mum down there in the parish of Blarney, and he moved into the house with her. They got married and there was three of us born there. And in 1947 we moved up to Clare when an old uncle of Dad's had passed away in 1946, and there was nobody living in the house, and that's our house at the moment. But there was nobody living in the house, so we moved into it. And indeed that was in bad repair, and he'd done a fair job on it too. But
And where was the house?
the house in Clare.
Aye.
The house in Clare is in a little townland called Cornegano. Cornegano, Cahir, they're both together. They're two little townslands, and they're in the parish. Well, I was explaining it to Chris a little bit earlier on. We're right on the border of the parish of O'Gunalaw and Bodyke Tomgraney, but we're actually in the parish of O'Gunalaw. And there was always, it is an awkward spot to be living. You're better off if you're living in the middle of the parish. You can be either one way or the other. But I was going to school in the parish of Bodyke, Tomgraney, in Cahir I was going to school, but living in O'Gunalaw parish. And we used to go to church then in O'Gunalaw and go to school. But anyway.
And where were you hearing music? Like, what were you hearing?
Funny enough, in our little area, there was no real legend of music in our area. Everybody was just tipping away at a little tune, but there was no well-known musician until you'd go over to Tulla, where the Tully Cayley band was. And of course, we had the best Cayley band in Ireland was in Tulla at the time. And then, of course, you had Kilfenora was a bit over West Clare, and Lochtarn Afa was in Milltown, Malbay.
And would you be exposed to any of that music when you were growing up?
They'd very often times come to play in our little area.
Like in the parish hall?
In the parish hall, yeah. You'd walk for miles to hear them. Either any of the Cayley bands.
Do you remember, like, when you were a youngster hearing them and thinking,
oh yeah,
wow.
Oh, I do indeed.
Uh-huh.
I never forget it. Because when you're a young person like that, it's like, you look up to the people who can do things pretty well. If he's a good footballer, you look up to him, and if he's a good hurler, you look up to him. If he's a good musician, you'll look up to him. But there was over Tulla area for some reason or another. That's where Mary McNamara comes from now. Around that area there seemed to be, and Fecal, Martin Hayes. Martin Hayes' father was a huge influence on me. His name was Patcho Hayes, and a nicer man you could never ever meet, and a great player. He doesn't get a lot of credit for the music he played. They'd always talk about Paddy Kenny, or they'd talk about Vincent Griffin, or they'd talk about Bobby Casey, or maybe Martin Burns and Sean Maguire and all them, but P.J. Hayes, Martin's dad, was one of the people that gave me so much encouragement, and I will never forget it for him. He would sit down with me as quick as he would sit into the middle of the Tully Cayley band. He led the Tully Cayley band for about 40 years, and he kept a beautiful band going, like, all his lifetime. And if you chanced to call into his house, it didn't matter what he was doing out in the field. God, he'd come in and he had as much time for he was a beautiful fella. And I had the pleasure of playing with him in a few places. Uh-huh. We played at weddings. Joe and I and himself played at a couple of weddings together. That was the band. Pijo in the middle of the two of us, and we were playing two accordions. That was the band in the Queen's Hotel in Ennis. Jeez, I'll never forget it.
And what were you learning from him? If that's
well, do you know? It was just that you thought so much of him, that you were listening so hard to him, that he had patience too. He'd say, lads, we'll play the tune you know. And we didn't have many tunes, John. I didn't, but he could play any tune, of course. But then he'd break into a tune and he'd bring us along, and he was a great fella, great man. And then there was another man as well that gave me a lot of encouragement when we were young, and he was the doctor in Fecal, and he was Dr. Bill Lucknan, and he was one of the fiddle players in the Tullykelly band at the time as well. The fiddle players in the Tulla band at the time was Pat O'Hayes, Paddy Kenny, Dr. Bill Lucknan, and there was a fella from Crusheen by the name of Jack Shaughnessy. 4 fiddle players in it. And like when the 4 of them had stopped playing together, you didn't need anybody else. They were that good, And
what was it like for you growing up there, like in your house, right? So how many was in the family?
There were 7 in our family.
Aye.
7 of my mum and dad in the small little house, and as I said to Chris before, I think I was born lucky, really, But we had great parents. The likes of them, they couldn't, they never had anything in their pocket. There was no such thing as money. There was no such thing as a car, or But everybody was helped by my mum and dad. Even people who might be passing by, there was always a dinner for them, or there was always a bed for them. And there was 9 of us in the house. They were put lying down on a mattress on the floor. That sort of a thing. And then Dad, being a builder, he was so handy with his hands. He could turn his hand to about anything. Even, it didn't matter what it was, even the electricity, which is something that nobody should touch except an electrician. But by God, Dad was game enough to touch it anyway, and he had no problems with it. Yeah. And he was the handyman in the area. And after he leaving Carnegie and coming to Australia, I heard that he was the biggest loss to the area. He was the handyman leaving the area. Yeah. But he was a great fella, and he helped everybody and built their houses and renovated them, and I'm not sure that he get any money for it. I'm not quite sure. If he did, it was very, very little. He'd get a good dinner and a good lunch in the middle of the day, but he probably did get a few bob, but I never heard much about it. I know anyway that he he built one house from foundation to the top of the chimney. And I can't tell you how much he got for it, because you wouldn't think it was true, because it wasn't very much anyway. But they were for a neighbour, the best neighbours that you could ever be, so he built the house for them. That was it. You wouldn't get many people to do that sort of a thing nowadays. It took him 2 years to build it. And in the middle of it, he worked on it in the middle of the winter, and I know he got rheumatic fever out of it. And he finished up in hospital for about 10 months in 1950 or 51. He spent 10 months in hospital. We were sure he was gone. But by God, he was a big, strong man, but I do think that it affected his health. I think it gave him a murmur in his heart. And it was a heart attack that killed him in 1986. He came out. The other part of the story was then that, of course, Tom and I left home in 1959. I didn't have a job at the time, and a friend of ours had come home from Australia. He was up in Wagga Wagga. He was a priest up in Wagga, in the Diocese of Wagga. And he came home and he asked me, Dad, to renovate his house, do a bit of plastering on it and build the piers out the front, and even we put running water into it. I came and gave Dad a bit of a hand at it because I didn't have a job. But he told us about this great country that he was living in out here in Australia, and that there was a project on it at the moment called the Snowy Mountains Hydroelectrical Scheme. And every nationality, he said, was represented there. There was people from every country there. And I sort of picked my ears up and I thought to myself, I have no job here. And I wonder how would I go out there. So I made a few inquiries of him. Or maybe he probably gave me a bit of encouragement as well. But the next thing, I had my passport ready. And when my brother heard that I was coming, he said, I'm coming with you. He had a job. He was working in the co-op store down in Scariff. And he had a job. I didn't have a job. But before we knew, we were on our way to Australia.
And how was it for your mum and dad, sort of, like, because I know there was a lot of families went through that at the time, right? Having youngsters leaving. I mean, it must have been hard for your mum and dad.
It was very hard. It must have been very hard on them. But they seen that there wasn't a job for us there at the time. You know, you had to have something to, like, you had to make some sort of a living for yourself, you know.
Aye.
Were a lot of your mates leaving at the time as well?
Not many.
Right.
No, Darren, there wasn't. Thank you, Chris. No, not many. If they were leaving, they'd be going to England. Yeah. Very few to America, but mostly to England, because the building trade was good in England at the time, and everybody seemed to be getting a job there. But no, the next thing, we were on our way to Australia. And I landed in Sydney, and then the next thing we're up the Snowy Mountains.
Yeah, well, I think if we're going to start talking about Australia, we might have a quick tune if that's all right, because I'm sure.
Yeah, we'll
we're only
play
the
a
tip of
tune.
the iceberg.
We'll play a tune, yeah. We'll play a little tune here, and this tune is called Father Kelly's Reel. And this Father P.J. Kelly was from Woodford in County Galway. And he composed a little book of music, and he was a great friend of my mum. We were born in Blarney, but Father P.J. Kelly was born in Woodford. And so my mum and my family became great friends of his, and he was a Columban father. And the next thing he was out in, was it in Fiji he was? He was in Pakistan and Fiji, and then he used to go backwards and forwards to Ireland. And the next thing, he came to Australia. But he was great friends with my mum at home. And he found his way, he was in Perth, he was based in Perth, but he used to come over to Melbourne to see the family every now and again. And he composed this tune. And the name of this tune, we call it Father Kelly's Reel. But the actual name of it is it the Rossmore Jetty? You know, I'm not sure, is it the Loch Derg or the Rossmore Jetty? It's one of the two.
Before we do move on to your life in Australia, with the family, how many was in your family? How many kids were there? Did you say it was 7 kids?
7 of us, yeah.
And how many actually learned to play?
I'd say about 5.
Right.
Some of them have fallen away from it a little bit. Johnny and Joe and myself was probably the main ones of it. Tom was the drummer. And then Stevie is a good player.
Right.
Stevie, he doesn't play a lot. He's good in a sing-song type of... if he has a beer or two and he's a great sort of player. But my sister Anna can play as well if she wanted to, but she doesn't play anymore, sadly. But about 5 of us, I'd say.
So then, as youngsters, what was that like learning together?
It was lovely. As I said, we only had the one little box, and we'd have a race home from school in the evening. And whoever would get their hands, whoever was the fastest runner would be the first one to come in.
That's what I was going to ask
you. There was no need at all of pushing people to learn. You know, nowadays people have to take their children to teachers and it can be expensive enough and a lot of time consuming. In my time, there was no such thing as any worries like that. You fight each other nearly over the instrument.
Was there any ever sense of rivalry?
Not really.
Yeah.
We all taught each other.
So more encouraging each other on rather than
there was no rivalry whatsoever, really.
Yeah.
And we all, you know, one of us would learn a little tune and we'd hear somebody playing a tune and you'd learn that. I remember I was at a house one night and there was this fella there, he was playing the maid behind the bar. His name was Joe McNamara. He was one of the accordion players out of the Tullochilly band. And he was playing the maid behind the bar, and as well as that, I learned that from him that night. And the other tune I learned from him was the Ash Plant. And he was playing for a set in a small kitchen. And it was just like what Chris is here. I was sitting in here. He was playing into my ear.
So you're sitting right...
For the Ash Plant.
Uh-huh.
And that Ash Plant never left my head. I never will. It was great. And Joe McNamara taught me that tune.
You talk about learning that tune and those 2 tunes. He taught me those in the night. When was it that? Did you have that gift that you could pick up a tune that quickly?
I did. I was keen. I was keen. You know, if you're keen enough, it's like going to school, I suppose. You know, if you want to learn something, you learn it. But the music was something that went into my head and it stayed in there. I think it did anyway. It's not as good anymore. It's not as good. It's gone in here now and out this side. And the other thing I always liked to learn with the tune was I always wanted the name of it. You know, if you can learn the tune and get the name of it. But after saying that, we never read music. We didn't read the music. You know, it was all by ear. Mm-hmm. No sheet music, nothing.
Did you have a radio in the house?
We did towards the end.
Aye.
But the only problem with our house was we didn't have any electricity. So our radio had to be run off a wet battery, and it had to be charged every 3 weeks or 2 or 3 weeks. and to be only the radio would only be played for the news. If there was a bit of traditional music on the radio, which was very scarce that time, they didn't play much Irish music on the radio.
Even on, was it Athlone?
No, they were very, very poor, really. We had the Job of Johnny work by Kieran McMahona, and he gave it to us on Monday night for 15 minutes. And then we used to get the Scottish programme that we loved. It was on at 25 minutes to 7 until 7 o'clock. From 25 to 7 to 7 o'clock. That was the time it was on.
Scottish dance music?
Scottish dance music, and we loved that. But you'd love any type of music as long as it was in our own vein. I loved the Scottish music as well. There was great Scottish bands, Bobby McLeod and Jimmy Shandon, Jimmy Blue and all them.
My dad used to listen to Jimmy Shand every Saturday night.
He did.
There was a show on Radio Scotland called Take the Floor, which still goes on. You know that show?
I know the one.
And you could always hear. Maybe I'm imagining this because I lived in Scotland for a long time, but I sort of remember hearing these accordion bands on the radio, and you could almost hear the sound of the hall that they were playing in. You knew they were playing in some rainy hall up the west coast of Scotland somewhere. You know, you could just picture it in your head. You know,
you could. Yes. Oh yeah.
So, but a very different style
Oh,
from,
very
from the
different
stuff
style.
that you're playing, right?
But Take the Floor was a great program. We loved that one.
Right.
That was with Dinjo.
Uh-huh.
Dinjo used to run that.
Right.
I think Dinjo Crowley was his name. But our radio had to be saved for that and for the game of football or hurling on a Sunday. And you had to make sure, the game of football went on for an hour and 15 minutes or an hour and 20 minutes or maybe a bit longer. And geez, you'd be watching it to see maybe the battery might be getting a bit flat. Coming near the end of the game, 5 minutes to go, the next thing the battery goes flat. No power in the house. No, not at all.
The sound of a match is one of those things. It's like the smell of home cooked food or a sound of fiddles on the breeze. It's one of those things that just, boom, you're back in a memory instantly. I was just at home when the hurling grand final was on.
Yeah.
I was just like stepping back in time. I hadn't even walked into the room, but just that particular sound. I know they're different commentators, but whoa, you're back.
Oh, you are, yeah.
I used to. This is going off a bit. I used to love listening to Micheál O'Meara-Hirty as a commentator. He's an amazing describer of a game. Just
he was
amazing. It was like,
and even the man before him was even better, Dominic.
Who was that?
Micheál O'Hare.
Micheál O'Hare, yes.
Micheál O'Hare, and then Micheál O'Meara-Hirty came. No, and they've got good ones even still, but by God, Micheál O'Hare was something else.
I remember hearing him too. He used to do the horses a lot as well, didn't he?
He did
the racing.
Yeah. He was a great commentator.
Aye.
But the neighbours would come in. It wasn't everybody that had a radio. Half a dozen neighbours would come in on Sunday evening to hear the match. Mm-hmm. That was the highlight of the week.
And really. So most of the playing would be happening right in houses, though. Is that right?
All in houses. Aye. Nowhere else.
Aye.
Oh, nowhere else.
Aye.
Until a little bit later on in life, we formed a little Kelly band in about 1956 in Bodyke. We formed a little Kelly band in and
this was you and Joe?
Myself and Joe and Tom, the three of us was in it. Mm-hmm. And we had a flute player in it. His name was John Tobin. And any time I was saying to Chris that sometimes you learn a tune from somebody or somebody a little something and you never forget the person when you start playing the tune because you've learned it from him. John Tobin was his name. He was a flute player, a lovely fella. He's gone to heaven. He's passed away. And we had a fiddle player by the name of John Noonan. He was from the town of Tom Graney. And then we had a fella, Jay Boland was his name. He was another box player. And we had a man by the name of Martin Gooney who played the fiddle. And Peggy Ryan, she was Peggy Brady then. She was our singer. And my God, we had a lot of fun with that band. That was great fun. And the people liked us too, We weren't great indeed. We were only all learning. Everybody was learning. But the people supported us because they knew we were trying to do something for the little area. And Dr. Bill Lucknan now in Fakel that I was talking about there, and the likes of Pat Hayes, they'd be giving you great encouragement, They'd never say how great the Tullykelly band was. We knew how great they were in Kilfenora. They'd say, oh gee, your little band now here, they're coming on great. They're always giving you encouragement, Great old fellas. But yeah, that was the band, but it was all in the houses, yeah.
Aye.
But there wasn't many people. There wasn't many people in our little area to learn music, to learn tunes off, unless we went to hear the likes of Tulla or Kilfenora. there would be the odd one,
And would you be biking around from place to place?
Biking around.
Aye.
On a bicycle.
Aye.
Yeah.
Aye.
You had the fella always that would be playing gob music, dum diddle doodle diddle dum diddle 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 diddle. The place was full of them. You learned your tunes off them. Aye. They were the best fellas of all. He's sitting in the corner and he's jigging away like fair hell, and a half a dozen people dancing on the floor. Okay. That was the music.
Wow.
My uncle Tom, who was a brother of my dad's, and he was a big tall man, and he loved to dance too, but he was the musician. He'd sit in the chair and he'd go flat out. He was great. It was great.
Can you do that yourself? You sound like
I used to be able to do it. We were talking a while ago, Chris and I was, about my uncle down in Galway. Stephen Mahan was his name. And he used to play a tune, and we call it the Boys of the Loch now. But he used to call it Jerry Crossed into France. And this is the Boys in the Loch. And it goes something like this. Diddle 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 dum diddle 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 dum diddle 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 dum diddle 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 dum diddle 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 dum diddle 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 dum diddle 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 dum. I think that's the Boys and the Lock, isn't it? I think I hope it is anyway. But my Uncle Stephen used to call that Jerry Crosses to France.
Right. So.
And my other Uncle Tom was the fella that used to do that sort of music, you know. Gob music, they called it.
Gob music.
Gob music,
Aye.
yeah.
Aye.
And 'twas so lovely. Them are the fellas you learn your tunes off.
Yeah. Right. So do you just before we do another tune, I wanted to ask you. So when you're coming towards the time when you're thinking that you're going to be leaving, right, to move, and you're realizing that you're probably going to move and be away for a while. I mean, do you remember the night you left?
No, jeez, I remember it well. I'll never forget it. It was the saddest night of my life. I'd say one of the saddest nights of my life. But I always had intentions coming back. I wasn't going away forever. I gave myself 5 years. We had a little farm, and I thought to myself, I'm going to go to Australia and earn a few dollars, and I'm going to put a few sheep and a few cattle and a few little bit of livestock on this farm for my dad. Because I knew there wasn't any other way of doing it. And anyway, that's what I had in mind. I said, I'll go for 5 years to Australia and I'll come back. So I went round. The neighbours knew I was leaving 2 or 3. They knew for 2 months before we left. And they were trying to avoid me. I knew they just didn't want to. No, they weren't trying to avoid me, but they were trying to. Everybody was lonesome to think that we were going. We were the young people of the area. And the rest of the people around the place were older generation. And they hated to see the young people leaving. But we sort of had to go. And I remember the night before I left, I went round to each house just to say bye-bye. And God, I'll never forget that night. There was a lot of sad people. I wasn't the only one that was sad. I made everybody sad. The two of us went around, and your friends who played in the band with you, and they were playing hurling with you, and you met them every day, and we went to dances together, and the next thing you were leaving them all behind and going to Australia, to a place that nobody seemed to ever come back from. The few people that went that I knew before, we never heard of them again. They went to Australia. And when I came to Australia, didn't I pick them up? I found them. I made it my business to find them. I had to go to Queensland to find one. One of them was down here in Geelong. Another one I didn't find. Anyway. But that was very sad. And we left in, and we came as far as Dublin, and got on the ship on the boat there in Dunleary.
To Holyhead.
Dunleary to Holyhead, and the train from Holyhead to London, and we stayed 3 nights there with my auntie, who was my mum's sister, in a little place called Stockwell. And then we went to Tilbury Dock 3 days later, and the next thing we were on the Orchidays, sailing for Australia through the Suez Canal. And it was sad. It was a sad time, but being young, you took it. I know I was leaving the sadness behind. It was an adventure for me.
Aye.
For us. And anyway, we landed in Australia, in Sydney, and then the next thing we're up in the Snowy Mountains, and great job up there.
Did you have anybody to come to in Sydney?
No.
Right.
No, I had nobody.
Aye.
No, but nobody that I knew of.
And did you have an instrument with you?
Oh, I did, yeah.
You did. So did you have a few tunes on the way?
Oh, yeah, I did. I had an instrument with me.
So how long, when you were in Sydney, did you stay there for a while before going to the
About
mountains?
2 or 3 weeks.
Yep.
Down. I stayed about 2 or 3 weeks in Sydney, but I was working in a factory in Sydney, and I wasn't a bit happy with being there because I knew there was a lot more money. I was only 18, and of course I told them what my age was, and then they only gave me a child's wage,
Yeah.
So the people that were working with me was getting 3 times more money than me, and I said, oh God, I've got to get out. My age is going to go up by 3 or 4 years here. I'm going to get old all of a sudden. Next job, I was 21 on the next job. God, how did that happen?
Were you? What were your first impressions of here, like of Australia?
Well, do you know, I didn't know where I was going. I didn't really. I didn't realise that we had a white generation at all here. A white people at all. I thought there'd be the odd one or the odd few. I thought it would be mainly Aboriginal people. But then I got a surprise at it then, and I remember I couldn't understand the Aussie accent at all. I could get it, but when the races started on the radio, no one could I understand what Bill Collins was talking about or Bert Bryant. The races, it was just like he was talking in a foreign language. And we landed in Sydney just before the Melbourne Cup, and I remember, was it Gassam that won it in 1959? Have I it wrong?
I wouldn't know. I'll have to look it up.
I think it was Gassam. It was some name like that. Anyway, they won it anyway.
Aye.
And I couldn't believe that just before the race started, they turned off everything in the shop, everything. Said, quiet, everybody sit down. What's happening here? Oh, the race is on. What? Did they stop for the races in this country? The Melbourne Cup was on.
Yeah.
Could not believe it. Everything had to stop. But fair play to them for their tradition,
Well, should we have another tune and then we'll talk a bit about
we will.
the Australian.
Will we play Paddy on the Railroad, Chris? That tune has been around a while. That was one of the first tunes we learned, I suppose. But I learned it on the C-sharp D box, which I would be playing it like this now. It would be in the key of C on this. I played it in C there now because this is a B and C box, but if I was playing on a C-sharp D, I'd be playing it in the key of D.
That sounded like a completely different tune to me. Almost, this is my novice ears, but that was almost maritime.
Yeah.
Much more so than the previous version.
Yeah.
And is that simply just because of the key change?
Yeah, the key change, yeah.
And is that all that's happening there?
That's all.
Far right.
That's all.
And so when you shift between those two keys, are you able to do different things with your fingering in terms of the ornamentation?
Yeah, it's like playing two different instruments, Dominic. Exactly like. No, I don't play on that.
Because that sounded beautiful. That's
yeah, it is. That's
so
the style now I started off with, and the old C-sharp D box I have at home. I just sit down sometimes with it and I just tip away like that, and it's very, very, it's very relaxing type of music. But
you just moved your body there like you were just sitting down in a big comfortable chair. That was really funny. That's exactly.
It is. I'm sorry, no, I didn't bring in the other little box. It belongs to Joe actually, but. So then, what was the work like when you go up to the Snowy River and you're doing you're working there in construction sides of things? I mean, when I went to the Snowy River, I remember it was on a Sunday we went up there, and anyway, there was very little jobs out available at that particular time, but they were mad looking for people to work in the kitchen, in the mess room they called it. And it was the Chinese that was running the catering up there. And when Tom and myself went up there, actually it was the priest that brought us up there. When we got up there, they said that they'd employ us straight away. It would be 7 days a week. I said we'd take anything, to get started off, and you get to know people. And that's where we started off there. And Tom stayed with them full time. I left them. Then I went out in construction. I went out driving machinery out on the spillways and on. Actually, I finished up going into the tunnel. Of course, you get greedy as opportunities arise. People offer you more money. You'll get more money if you go into the tunnel. There's danger in it. And I'm not worried about danger. No worries at all. Anyway, I was outside on machinery for a while, and then they said they'd give me about, not quite double the pay if I went into the tunnel. So I went into the tunnel. The first day I went into the tunnel, they took us in 3 miles into a hole in the ground. And it was scary enough now. When I got in there and when I seen what I had to do, I was working on the machines in there too. They have a cable car that goes in and out to bring out the material once nowadays here, the way we're doing the tunnels here now, there's a machine doing everything now. It was all done by hand up there, where they had to would jackhammer it and there had to be explosives and everything put into it. And then they had a little train that would take out all the rock and everything. But I was working just maintaining the little train, which was it was an easy enough job. I wasn't in danger really, but at the same time you were underground and things happen under the ground. And they went. I remember a couple of places where the tunnel went through. They went underneath the river, and of course the river was coming straight in through the roof. You'd get drowned wet. You'd have to have wet weather gear on in there, until they concreted over. But yeah, I was in there, but I got a disease in my fingers then from the dirt in there, from the. It was dermatitis, I think they called it, and I had to leave it after. I only spent about 6 months in it, but it was long enough. I done all right, and then I was outside again on the machinery outside again. Then went
and that was you and Tom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me and Tom. Yeah.
And how long were you at that before you were in a position to move?
Well,
to Melbourne.
So. No, but yeah, I was there for probably a year when. We have a GAA in Australia here, and at that stage it was just New South Wales and Victoria. Nowadays it is all of Australia, and New Zealand is all in it now. It's Australasia now. But at that stage it was just Sydney and Melbourne, New South Wales and Victoria. There wasn't many hurlers in Sydney and to make up a full team, so they contacted the Snowy Mountain, and there was about 5 or 6 of us up there in different areas that could play hurling, that had played hurling. So they asked us to come down to Melbourne to make up a team to play against Victoria, which we did, and it was a great weekend down here. And that was the weekend I met my wife. Anyway, it was at a dance up here at St. George's in Carlton, not far from here, just up at the corner of Pelham Street and. Is it Rathdown that comes across there? One of them anyway. But anyway, I was at the dance there that night. I played the hurling during the day, and she said she had seen me during the day, or had seen me the night before even at a dance that was down in South Melbourne. But anyway, I got introduced to her somewhere or another at the dance in St. George's, and we drifted apart then. I went back to the Snowy Mountains, and we sort of kept I'd come down every now and again, and we'd meet at this Irish dance. They come down about every 6 months, not very often, and backwards and forwards. So in the finish, anyway, big God, we were seeing a bit more of each other. So in the finish, that was the story of my life. Eileen Nash is her name, so I married her, and she's a great little old woman, She's a great woman now. She had 9 children for me, and we have 25 grandchildren, and we've lived a great life, She was great to take in, 7 or 8. My mum and dad came in 1964. Did I tell you that? I did.
Well, so I was going to ask you about that. So just to get the sort of timing right. So you're up in the Snowy River, and then you meet your wife, and you move down here after a couple of years. Would that be right?
I moved down here after about 3 years or 3.5. I was in the mountain.
Right. So then you moved down to Melbourne.
I did.
And is that when you got married?
I came down one time. And anyway, I found out that the money wasn't half as good here as it was in the mountain. And I thought to myself, oh, jeez, I should go back to the mountain again, because I wanted to buy a house and everything. And Eileen and myself had got engaged. And I thought, no, I should go back to the mountain. I went back up to Jindabyne. And I was half scared that I'd get a job. I didn't want a job.
Didn't want a job that would be too good.
After getting up there, I was scared that I'd get a job. I said, but God, there was no job available anywhere, so I came back again, and that's when it all happened. And then I got engaged, and then we got married, and we bought a house in Reservoir in 9 Hobbs Crescent, and we're still living there, thanks be to God. And in 1964, my mum and dad landed out with the rest of the family. The school closed down in Caherhurley. There was only 5 children going to the school. Me 2 brothers and 2 sisters were 4 of them, and 1 other young lad. The school closed down. There was no transport for them to get to school. That time, I don't know why the council or the government or somebody couldn't supply some sort of little bit of transport for them. It was 4 or 5 miles they'd have to go to school and home again in the evening. And then my sister Mary was only 6, and she was only a little lady. And so they left there. They left there and went over to England to my mum's sister. And that was in Stockwell. And they lived there and worked there for a year or 2. And anyway, I got a letter from my dad. He never wrote to me in his life, but he wrote to me anyway to see what would I think of them coming to Australia. It frightened me, because I sort of didn't know whether I was going to go back to live in Ireland or where I was going to settle down. But anyway, Eileen and I got married, and I didn't answer the letter, so another letter came, and I wrote back to him, and I said, Dad, you have to make up your own mind. I explained to him about the country. I said, it was a great place for me, but if you'd be happy here, or the rest of the family, I didn't want to make the decision and bring 7 of them here, and they to say to me, look, we don't like it here. But thanks be to God, the next thing he jumped on a boat over there and came to Australia, and they came around by the Cape, because the Suez Canal was blocked at the time. It took them about 7 weeks to get here.
It's a big. Moving to London's one thing for people of your parents' generation, right? We're probably around the same age as my dad, probably.
Yep.
It's a huge voyage into the unknown for them too. It says something about their sort of willingness to go out into the world, but it also says something about how bad things must have been in Ireland.
Wasn't it shocking? I think there was a bit of commotion about it. It went through the Clare County Council anyway, and there was a lot to be said about it, why a young family had to leave, because they were it's the young people that they're the next generation sort of thing, and why did a family have to leave? But anyway, I just heard a little bit about it later on in my life. But I thought it was very brave of my mum and dad, first of all, to leave home and go to England, and secondly, to move out here to Australia. And they were about 50 at the time. They were about 50 years of age. And thanks be to God, they settled in so well. And they moved into the house with Eileen and myself, and it was a fair ask for them to move in with her and with me. There's no worries for me, but she had never met them before. And on the way, while they were on the boat, my eldest boy was born. Jimmy was born. So she had a baby to present to them as soon as they came. So they lived with us for a year, and they bought a little house down the road in Spring Street, and they lived there for 40 years. And I buried my poor dad in 1986, and my mum died in 2003. And
How are you feeling? Do you want to keep going, or you?
yeah, we'll go another bit, yeah.
Oh, yeah, 'cause
I
Yeah,
don't think
we
we
will.
can go past your influence in Melbourne and what you've done music-wise over the last 30 more years, probably in Melbourne, 40 years in
Oh,
Melbourne.
yeah.
So
Well-
at what point did you start playing in Melbourne, and what was the journey from when you started kind of getting your first session and
Yeah.
from then?
Well, the funny thing, that same weekend that I met my wife, I met Billy Morton that weekend.
Can you
Billy
explain
was-
who he is?
Billy was the man that used to run the session over in the Quiet Man, and he's a legend. Billy was, and he'd done so much for the music. Like he was the foundation of all the Irish traditional music, I feel, in Melbourne. Well, he was one of the great. He was one of the great men for our music. There's no doubt about it. And he taught the younger people, and he taught anybody who wanted to play, and he encouraged everybody and ran sessions and a great fella. But I met him the same weekend as I met Eileen, and I had my first tune with him in the Pastoral Hotel in St Kilda Road. Was it the Pastoral is the name of it? It was. That's where we were staying that weekend. The Pastoral? No, Jesus, maybe I might have it wrong. Anyway, it was in a hotel in St Kilda Road anyway. When Billy and I had and I was so tired after being to the dance that night. And then we sat down in the bed in my room, and we played, and I remember I just fell back in the bed and fell asleep. And he played away. Billy played away for a while. But anyway, then I think I started playing probably at the Celtic Club then.
And were you playing for dancers, or
I was playing
it
for everybody.
Aye.
I was. Yeah, I played for everybody, and we started a little band. No, I don't know what year it was. We called it the Merry Moonshiners Ceilidh Band, and Eileen's sister was in it, and Eileen's brother, and plus 3 or 4 more lads. And we were about the only Ceilidh band that was in Melbourne at the time. The Merry Moonshiners was the name. We kept going for 5 or 6 or 7 years probably. And then Ceoltas was the next part of it. With I'm a founder of Ceoltas. I was that's a long time ago. I think it's 45 or 50 years ago now. They're coming up to their anniversary.
And where was Eileen from? I never asked you where she was from.
She's from Fitzroy, North Fitzroy.
Right.
She lived right beside the Fitzroy football ground. It was the old Lions football ground, and St George's Road. They lived there, and we got married in we got married on Australia Day, 1963.
What was your wedding like?
By Judge, it was a fair wedding. It was a Ceilidh. Dominic, it was a we had a Ceilidh. Because her brothers and sisters, they could all play.
Uh-huh.
And a couple of cousins as well. There was another first cousin, his name was Desi Whelan. Poor fella, lost his life on a train or something later on. He was a great fiddle player. And they had a little band of their own. Then there was another fella here by the name of Ambrose Devlin. He played an accordion. He was from Donegal, from around Letterkenny or somewhere. And they had a little band there on the day. And we had a great wedding.
Aye. Should we have another tune and then?
What will we do, Chris?
Something I know.
Yeah. What about the Donegal reel?
Why not?
You just mentioned earlier on that initially there wasn't a lot of people who were ready to play a tune, but once you started leading, you'd have plenty of followers, and that's something that you really have continued to do to this day. You've a band of people that would follow you anywhere because of your leadership. When did that start?
Well, I suppose about 20 years ago, when Chris asked me to play in the Corkman, we had a lovely pub up the road here that we don't have anymore. It was called the Corkman Irish Pub, and Chris and Kieran O'Connell was in the pub, and they asked me to play up there. And I'd say from there, that was probably the time, people had come in and they'd session with you. Before that, I was in a band most of the time. I was in different bands. I was in a half a dozen bands, and all my own children, they all play as well. Like I forgot to tell you that we got them all taught music, and we have our own little family band, even to this very day. We can sort of cater for any audience.
What are you called?
Well, I suppose we're the Fitzgerald family band, I suppose. I suppose there's lots of Fitzes.
Chris here.
That's it, he's one. Of course he is, yeah. We're all Fitzes. There's another one over here. Yeah, the Fitzgerald family band. Yeah, we have a lot of fun with it. But the sessions was probably the ones where you sort of lead the way.
Chris Fitzgerald here wants to come in here. And
good band, Chris.
So at the Rose of Tralee Ball a couple of years ago, so Paddy, the Fitzgerald family band does that, but the boys used to be part of a cover band called Big Deal, wasn't it, Paddy?
Yeah.
And they are phenomenal musicians and playing all the contemporary sort of stuff. And then on stage left is Paddy, ripping into it with all the current popular music. It is one of the sights it's a delightful sight. It's just beautiful. And there is Blarney, my daughter, and I were at the ball because Blarney's a manager here, and we went into the green room, and it was so pleasing. Paddy's there sitting with the boys. They're all having a meal and a drink, and the proudest man in Melbourne is sitting at the head of the table. It's such a lovely experience. So it's not just the family band in that sense. It's just the whole embodiment of music and culture and family. It's just fabulous. So sorry to interrupt there.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Well, Eileen sings a good song too. Like she was a great help to us in the early days when we were getting the band going. She was the lead singer in the band, and well, she wasn't. All the lads played, but she'd sing the old Irish songs. Like the lads were up to date with the Galway Girl and Ed Sheeran. Well, even before that, But she'd be singing the Homes of Donegal, and the Green Glens of Antrim, and those sort of Tipperary so far away. And a mother's love is a blessing. But since her mother died, she wouldn't sing that song anymore. No, she sort of said, "No, I can't sing them sort of songs anymore." Goodbye, Johnny Dear, and them. So the songs that Johnny Patterson was from Fakel in County Clare, and he composed all them great ballads, the lovely Goodbye, Johnny Dear, The Mother's Love is a Blessing.
And so when you were playing then as well, Joe was here too, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you a wee bit about just the style that you have and the style that Joe has. How would you describe the style that your respective styles?
Well,
because Joe, just for anybody listening who's not familiar, Joe's also a really well-known musician here and back in Ireland, and just extremely highly thought of.
Joe is really the best player of all the family, and Johnny was a great player too, indeed. But Joe is sort of the real figurehead of the family in the traditional music scene, and he's a B&C player. As I told you, he went home around 1970, and he came back playing a C-sharp D, and then he came back with the B&C box and said we had to play the B&C box. I sort of stuck with the C-sharp D for a while because I didn't know anything else. But he was on the B&C, and he could play it as well as anybody. And he's got a great old style, and he's got a great nerve as well. You know, he could sit up there in front of an audience, and he wouldn't care who would be there. He can rattle out a great tune where I would be all over the place. You know, he's a very brave musician, and a very honest musician, and a great fella, and a great brother. He's a magic brother, that fella. And him and I, we were in partnership in a little business one time, and we did all right in it. We did okay, and he's a great fella, like all my brothers, and sisters. But yeah, he's got a very, very strong and powerful style, where I would be more now. If somebody wanted to dance a set here, we'll say dance the Caledonian set or the Cashel set or whatever, that's sort of more suited to me. Joe would be a concert player, you know, where he could sit in and probably play for the All Ireland Championships. You know, he's and very, very solid and very deliberate type of a player. Where I wouldn't be like that at all, but I'd be more of a rough and ready player, where I could rattle out a tune, you know, and I'd make fellas dance and women dance.
Right.
That sort of a way. Mm-hmm. That's the difference in our style of music. But then when we come together, we can sort of match it together reasonably well too, you know, because we know each other's tunes. He's got a lot more tunes than what I've got, and he's got a great ear as well. He's great to learn a tune, and well, I used to be good one time, but I've slowed down at it now. I'm not as good anymore. But
when you are playing in a session, and you have other players coming in, right? So one of the interesting things to me at this session here at the last year was just as a fairly novice player coming in, I was interested. Like, you really set the tone for the encouraging sort of feel of the place. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, for a player like yourself of the level that you are, I mean, I was going to say, do you never get impatient in a session? You know, just with, you know, you never know who's going to wash up. No, I'm thinking of myself.
Yeah. Just tell him he's all right.
No, but we knock a lot of satisfaction out of new people coming in. It doesn't matter who they are, and you know, or even if they can only play half a dozen notes, it's lovely to have somebody coming in, and you encourage them as good as you can, and just say, you know, because what's this Joe Cooley say? Isn't he doing as good as he can? He's all right. He's doing as good as he can. You know, I suppose everybody hasn't got the same ability to play. Certain people will win the All-Ireland. You know, he'll be the best player in Ireland or in Australia, and but another fella might be, you know, would never get anywhere, but he'd be just as good to listen to him. You know what I mean? And you've got to encourage everybody. I love encouraging people.
Good on you for that.
Teaching them a little tune, even, you know.
To feel welcome, even as a non-player, you can see it click around the room. It's a fantastic thing you do. I
go to the Lake School now. We have the Lake School. Felix Maher runs it.
In Carroit.
In Carroit, yeah. And I go up there and I give them a week up there early in the year, and I get a lot of satisfaction out of that, even, you know. Yeah. People come to you and they say, "Oh God, that was good. We learned a new tune or a couple of new tunes," and you know, that is as good as you know. What can equal that? I love it. You know.
Do you feel like you're passing on the encouragement that you got when you were a youngster, like you were talking about?
It is exactly the same thing, Dominic. It is exactly the same thing. I'm sure everybody thinks the same way, and everybody should think the same way. They should all try, and no matter what you're doing, you should try and teach and encourage somebody else, no matter who he is or she is. And you know, a person that can't play music and hasn't got any music ear, they think so much of you, even if you can only play do, re, mi. You know, I go to I play a bit in nursing homes now, and poor Johnny, God rest him, and myself, I used to enjoy having him because he'd play the guitar and he'd play a mandolin, and I'd tip away with him. And you know, you always get a poor old fella or a lady, and you get them to sing a little song, and he'd tip away with the guitar, and you get so much satisfaction. Oh, you know that the old people, you know, they think they're in the concert hall. The poor old things, you know, and they're so happy. It only lasts a half an hour. And I usually bring in one of my grandkids. She does a little bit of step dancing, and you know, you bring her in towards the end of it, and she just do a little step. Oh God! And you know, you get a lot of satisfaction out of old people hearing it. You know, even one of them in a nursing home one day, we went in and we'd done something there, and before I left anyway, didn't one fella give me an accordion? Oh. He said, my mother died. He said she played this, and 'twas made about 1890. It was a German, and she like, it was a German accordion. Bring it in one night to you. You'll have to play it for me. It was made about 1890.
It plays in German, doesn't it?
It does. Before I finished, he gave me his mother's accordion.
Jeez, that's amazing. Yeah. So one other thing I wanted to ask you, and you've been very kind to sit with us for so long, but I wanted to ask you just, you know, when you talk about yourself and your family just picking up this instrument and passing it amongst you as a family, it's so different from, and your awareness of the music is so different from today's youngsters, right? So how has that changed? I mean, do you think that's kind of changed the music? How does it change the music when it becomes something that people go to university to study now? Whereas even when I was growing up, which was only 40 years ago or whatever, like most people didn't do that, right? It wasn't a subject of study. It was just a thing that people did because your uncle played or so and so played. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I know exactly what you mean. Some people make a career out of it, you know.
Aye.
But maybe they wouldn't enjoy it as much as somebody like me who just tips away at it. But fair play to them, if that's the road they go down, that's fine. I don't care what way people go about their music or play it or do it. And some people can't play without having the sheet of music in front of them. I can't even read the music. I couldn't. But do
you still love it? Do you still get the same love out of it when you get up, sit down with that box on your knee there?
Maybe more than ever now. Maybe more than ever now, because when you get to my stage in life, there's only a certain amount of things that you can do. You can't kick a football anymore. You can't play a game of hurling anymore. Squash, I used to love playing squash. I used to run cross country, everything in any sport at all I did. But I thought to myself, and a lot of people say to me even now, people that I used to play football and hurling against, they say, God, you're very lucky. We've got nothing. You've got the music. And I am lucky that way. And I really enjoy it. And I love sitting down with anybody to play a little tune with them. And not to hear somebody singing a song or telling a story or anything, Yeah, I do. I love my music as much as ever. I'd say more, Dominic. And this fella is the cause of it all. I might be playing a call on this program.
You just knocked Chris Fitzgerald there.
I was going to retire when the Cork man finished up there, We lost the Cork man. And I said, that'll do me now. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in the middle of the floor down there. Who was the cause of it? Thank you, Chris.
Chris Fitzgerald.
Thanks, Chris. I enjoy it. Chris looks after me good in here, and Angelica, and that's why we love coming in here. I don't play in any other pubs, to be quite honest.
So, well, thank you for. I mean, this sounds ridiculous because I've only been here for a year and a half. But I was going to say thank you for everything you've done for players like over the years here.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's amazing. And thanks so much for sitting down and talking to us.
Thank you, Dominic.
It's
My pleasure.
And
It's
I'm
my
saying
pleasure.
thank you, but I'm actually just going to ask you to do another tune.
Yeah, we will.
For your jig or something.
Yeah, Chris. You lead this one,
And
Chris.
Blarney Pilgrims.
That's just
lovely.
beautiful. Thank you so much.
Lovely. Thank you, boys and girls.
I couldn't resist playing the tin whistle. I was sitting listening to that tune, which is the Blarney Pilgrims, funnily enough, and I sat through 1.5 times round, and I was like, I want to play, can I play? And I just thought, I'm going to play. So I played the last bit.
It was great.
Yeah.
What I particularly loved about that session too is, so I've been on this journey making the podcast and going after the music to try and understand it more. But going back about 9 years ago, I've been always interested, and this is kind of some proof, when my boys were still very young, so they were about 3 months old. Myself and Brooke, my wife, used to take the kids on a Sunday evening to a pub called The Quiet Man, which is in like Flemington or
Right.
Kensington, around that area in Melbourne.
Yeah.
There was a pub there, and used to be a great session in there, and that used to be Paddy that ran that session. Paddy and Joe used to be there, and there was a whole cast of people who now I'm actually getting to meet all these years later. But we always knew that Paddy was the leader in there, and we'd sit there, and at the time, because the kids were so young, we used to get a lot of things sent over from Ireland, so we'd get like rugby jerseys or guard jerseys, and it was the only time the kids really ever dressed identical. They're twins, so they'd be sitting there in their little green tops and or their Aaron jumpers with the legs swinging under the table. But it was so nice to be able to sit down with Paddy, and by coincidence I had my kids with me the night we did this interview, so the kids got to meet Paddy that night, and then we had dinner with them later on, and the boys sat there and they were having chats, just holding court like they would with anyone. And it was so nice to think that they've actually been watching this guy play for 10 years already, and to actually for us to be able to sit down and to get some of these stories from him, it was just it was really touching.
That is
loved it.
fantastic.
Yeah,
That is so great.
it means a lot. So thank you so much for your time, buddy.
Thank you, Paddy. Thanks very much again to Chris Fitzgerald, and thank you for listening.
Good luck.
Hi, my name is Pietro. Please become a good subscriber to the podcast. Thank you.